In this video, we're going to go over client validation flaws as they relate to application security. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is parameter tampering. So in web applications, the common way of submitting data is through a form. A form is basically a list of elements such as inputs, such as text boxes and text areas and drop downs, where users can interact with these elements, type in values, and then click a submit button, and then something's going to happen with that data. It's either going to be submitted behind the scenes or in the URL, and then based on that, it will retrieve something from the database or insert something into the database. So companies should not rely on users entering in what is expected because parameters on the client side can be easily tampered with. So let's show you some of the things that some companies might do to restrict input from their users. The first thing is they might have a restricted input. So as you can see here, we have a max length of 5 characters represented here by this input 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So anything more than that would be restricted, meaning the users can't enter in more than that. However, we'll show you how this can be easily bypassed. And the next type is read-only, which means that the user can read it, but they can't click in and actually change the value. Notice read-only attribute applied here. The next type of input is disabled, represented by this disabled attribute. The difference between disabled and read-only is that when you submit the form, no value is submitted with the form, whereas read-only would actually submit whatever's already inside of that text box. The next type is the drop-down. So you click this drop down and you see a bunch of values from here. So you use the select element and then you list out all the options that are available. Now each of these can easily be manipulated to send more values or different values than what is allowed. The next thing is checkbox. So checked is going to determine whether or not this is checked or not. If it is, then it's going to send the value that's associated with this checkbox. We can manipulate that as well. Then we have radio buttons where a user can select one or the other radio button, and the default one is going to be checked, and then the value of the checked one is selected. So if they select this first one, the value is going to be selected, and then the value of the second one is unselected. This value can easily be manipulated to do more than what someone was anticipating. The next input is the submit button. So the submit button has a value and a name associated with it, and this can be manipulated as well to do something else. So maybe there's another button that is triggered to do some other event. If we can just change the name to that other button, it could trigger this other event, which may not be intended by the application itself. And then finally, there is a hidden button represented by this hidden attribute, meaning that this input is not actually displayed, but when the form is submitted, any values that are in this input are going to be submitted with the form. So there are 2 methods for submitting a form. The first one is the post method, which means that the form values are going to be submitted behind the scenes. And then there's the get method where the form values will be submitted in the URL. So basically it will append to the end of the URL a question mark with each one of the names of the inputs and the corresponding values. Now you can see here in this get, we already messed with the parameter by adding an additional value or changing the value of the read only, etc. So an example of this is a user was trying to disable an auto payment that was scheduled to pay for a mortgage because they wanted to not pay more to the principal for that particular month. And so what they did is they went into reoccurring payments and saw that there was no method to edit or stop this reoccurring payment. So what they did is they went into the elements and they looked in to see if there was a way to stop or edit this. They noticed that there were some classes that were to hide this and some CSS to be able to hide certain elements. They disabled this and they then saw edit and stop buttons that then appeared. So they clicked the stop button to disable this reoccurring payment, and they were given this message that reoccurring payments cannot be stopped 5 days from within the draft day. So what they then tried was to edit the payment. So they changed the due date of this payment and it went through. So this is an example of trusting a client, but in reality, the client can manipulate this to do something other than what is intended by the web application. So what I want you to do is try a little bit of parameter tampering. Go to orman.creighton.edu and then client validation flaws. Specifically, we're going to open the parameter tampering post, and then read and follow the page description, and then try to tamper with all 8 post parameters. Go ahead and pause this video and try this on your own, and then come back to compare how this would be done. Okay, welcome back. Here is this web page. What we're going to do is manipulate 8 parameters. So there are actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then a hidden button parameter. Notice here we have a max length. If I try to type anything more, which I am, it's not going in. If I click on read only, nothing happens. If I click on disabled, nothing happens. If I click on the drop down, I have between 2 choices. I can either check or uncheck the box. I can select or unselect the button, and then I can submit this form. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this form by using this inspect tool and then click on the element that I want to manipulate. So here's the max length one. I'm going to come over here and just delete the max length attribute from this, and now I'm going to provide a value so you can see now I can type more than what the form was originally intended to do. I'm going to do this inspector tool and click on read only, and you see that it pops up. I'll just go ahead and delete this read only attribute, and you can now see that I can type in any text that I want to. We'll then go ahead and use our picker tool and select the disabled button, and you'll see this pops up over here. I'll go ahead and delete the disabled, and you can see now I can provide any text that I want to. In the drop down, we're kind of restricted to drop and down, so let's go ahead and use the inspector to click this, and we'll change one of these options from drop to another value, so text. And so I'll need to make sure that when I select the option, it's going to be the drop one, because that's the one I changed the value. With select buttons, what's going to actually be submitted is not what's displayed, but rather it's this value for the specific option. Then we're going to go ahead and click on this checkbox. We will then look for the checkbox, which is the input right here. We will then change the value from on to something else. So we'll just change it to text. And then we'll go to the radio button, and rather than having it be a value of selected, we'll change it to text, and make sure that we click on this again just in case. And then we will come to the submit button, and we will change the name to another name, and that would be text. And then finally, there is another hidden one right here, and this is obviously the hidden input. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete the hidden attribute, and you can see this hidden text field shows up. So I'm going to go ahead and just type in any value into this hidden field. I'll go ahead and hit submit button, and it says that I successfully tampered with all the parameters. All right, the next one's a little easier to tamper with. We're now going to just go to the same area, just select the get instead of the post, and then we're going to tamper with all 8 parameters. Okay, so here we are at the get method, and as you can see, the URL looks like this page. And so what I'm going to do first is just hit the submit button, and you can see that it automatically typed up all the different parameters that are going to be submitted. So I will just come in here and type anything that violates those constraints. So max length, we know that it only accepted 5 characters. Read only, if I just type in any value, it will then provide that value. We'll change drop to text. We'll change text box to text as well. We'll change radio to text as well. And we'll give a value for the hidden. We'll change button from button to text. And then finally, we will add the disabled attribute and set that equal to text as well, because that is our 8th element. I will then go ahead and just hit enter, submit this page, and then you will see a message that says we successfully tampered with all the parameters. So that was one approach. Another approach is to use Z-attack proxy, and this one makes it really easy for those post requests because you don't have to go and manipulate the form. We'll show you exactly how this is done. So what is Z-attack proxy? It's a tool that allows companies to find vulnerabilities in web applications. It's not just a hacking tool, but it's also a tool that companies can actually do their own penetration testing on their systems to make sure that they can remove any vulnerabilities before they send it out to production. It can be used during development to find any of those weaknesses as well as testing. And yes, it is used by pen testers all over the world. It is the #1 free tool out there for pen testing. So what we'll want to do is use the Zap browser to be able to capture certain things and then manipulate those as we go forward. In order to evaluate Zap, we're going to use JavaScript validation. Now, JavaScript validation, depending on the browser, you can manipulate it after the page has loaded or not. Zap allows you to send the elements after you've followed the JavaScript validation. So for example, if we had a form that asked us to enter a number between 1 and 10,000, and we had input of only numbers, and then someone could click the submit button, and if they didn't enter in that number, we could have JavaScript display errors right here. What would happen is that we could generate a script And the script would then compare to see if only numbers were entered. So this digits regex is a regular expression to detect if only numbers are entered. We will then have a function called validate. Notice up here what we're going to do is have an onSubmit. This is going to call a JavaScript function called validate. So it's going to return that value. This is the function, and it's going to run validate. So it's going to run everything between this curly bracket and this curly bracket. So what is that it's going to do? It's going to start with a blank message, and then it's going to say if there is no value for the only numbers text box, then we will have a message that says please enter a value. So it would appear as you can see here. Otherwise, we are going to do a digits regex test. So we're going to test if the value from the only numbers text box matches the digits regex that we've defined up here. If not, we're going to have a message that says only numbers are allowed. And then if there is a message, we're going to display inside of the error the message that was returned. And then we'll return false, which means that we will not allow the form to be submitted. Otherwise, we will return true, meaning that the form will be submitted and go through. So what I want you to do is use the Zap browser to be able to bypass this JavaScript validation. So we're going to do this by opening up Zap first. So here's Zap loading. Sure, I'll go ahead and say yes, I want to persist. Now one thing that you'll need to do if you're using version 2.9 or higher is click this Manual Explorer. Disable this Enable HUD. This one seems to get in the way of me being able to actually interact with my browser. And then you're going to want to pick the browser you want to use. I'm going to use Chrome, and then I'm going to go up here and click this button. So what this is going to do is going to create a new browser that looks like and mimics Chrome, but it is going to be a proxy, which means that it's a middleman. So anything that is submitted through forms is going to go through zattack proxy first, and then it will be submitted to the site that's expecting that to be submitted. Notice here that Chrome flags this as automated test software is currently being run. So we're going to wait for that to load. All right, so we go ahead, click the login button. We log into the server. And then we're going to go to our personal directory, and then we'll go to JavaScript validation. All right, so here on this page, we have a bunch of elements that are going to be submitted. So we need to enter in the correct values here. Otherwise, if we don't, for example, if I enter in a fourth character and it's only expecting 3, we have JavaScript that is going to validate each one of these fields. And so we'll never be able to submit this form. So what we have is a bunch of values that are auto-populated. If you actually click the submit button, this form would go through. But before you do that, we're going to go ahead and click this green circle, which will then become red circle, which is a breakpoint, which means that once I submit the form, it's going to pause everything before sending this through. So I go ahead and submit the form. You'll notice here that it jumps immediately over to zattack proxy, and then we can manipulate this to be able to pass in the values. So once you're done, you can click this play button. So what I want you to do is try this on your own. Try to manipulate each one of these pieces. See if you can get this to accept values beyond what would normally be accepted. So go ahead, pause this video, and then come back when you're ready to check your answer. Okay, so the first thing you notice here is that we have 3 lowercase, so let's just add a fourth one. This one is all digits, so we just need to add a letter. This one says no special, so I'm going to just add an underscore. This one says only number text, so I'll just change that to a 7. This says it must be a zip code, so we'll just add a letter into that. This says it must be a zip code, so I'll add a letter to that. And this one says it's a phone number, so I'll just add a letter to that. I'll go ahead and click this play button, and you can see it runs through. So we'll toggle back over to the browser. All right, and you can see that we have successfully bypassed the JavaScript form validation. So all the values that I just changed this to were successfully submitted, even though the form would not have legitimately accepted that. So the rule here is don't trust the client, because the client can manipulate the form to submit whatever values you want. So you need to do the background checking on the server to ensure that this is not being misused.